Omegas are necessary for proper neurological function. They're a great antioxidant or anti-inflammatory. And inflammation plays a huge role in mental health. And then on top of that, we've got 1,000 units of vitamin D3 in there. And vitamin D3 is interesting because it's the only vitamin that's also a hormone that has receptors in the limbic area of the brain that control mood and concentration. So that was pretty interesting. And Teresa, we were talking too about how omegas have been really looked at as necessary for cognitive improvement and cognitive function. Did you want to speak to any piece of that?
So I think that the biggest part is the lack of the correct omegas whether it be diet or in supplements that are available to the public. So you see the dementia beginning at a younger and younger age. And one of the reasons, of course, is the inflammation route.
Absolutely. You know, inflammation, it has been said that some of the most effective antidepressants on the market are actually anti-inflammatories. And frankly, I would tend to agree with that. You know, I don't want to get outside the scope of what we're talking about, but we typically think of neurotransmitters, dopamine, norepinephrine, epinephrine, is primarily being related to mental health, but their primary role is actually in the mediation and amelioration of inflammation in the brain. Um, it is interesting. I ran across an article in the National Institute of Health website that was talking about how a combination of EPA and DHA omega fatty acids slowed cognitive aging by 2.5 years. And I thought that was interesting. When we think about the omegas and we think about how necessary it is for proper neurological function, the anti-inflammatory component, and then what vitamin D brings to the table, I think it's an important first piece of looking at brain health. Um, but you know, you can have the greatest looking car on the road, but if you have no fuel, it isn't going to go anywhere. And so that's where CoQ10 comes in with
Mhm.
PQQ. Now, again, in your pharmacy, that's probably the number one thing you're seeing fly out the door, isn't it?
It is absolutely the number one thing. So we try to get that one out the door first because they notice the difference. And then once they feel that difference, then it's easy to go ahead and get started with the fish oil or add the MemX to the program.
Yeah, it's a actually a tangible, a palpable experience because coenzyme Q10 is the enzyme necessary for every cell in the body to make its own energy. You know, for so long, people have thought of coenzyme Q10 as a cardiac supplement. And that makes sense because what's the hardest working muscle in your body? Well, it's the heart. So if you're going to see improvement in cellular energy, where are you going to see it first? Well, you're going to see it in the hardest working muscle in your body, which is going to be the heart. However, that improvement is in all cells, and that includes brain cells. Every cell uses coenzyme Q10 to make its own energy. Now, we take it a step further with PQQ, pyrroloquinolone quinone, because that supplement has been shown to increase the density of the mitochondria that's in the cell. Now, the interesting thing is that mitochondria is where the energy is made. So if you can imagine, the mitochondria is like the generator of your energy. So PQQ makes that denser, essentially bigger. So you have a larger generator that's going to enable you to more efficiently provide energy to the cell. So that's sort of a two-pronged approach with what we're doing with coenzyme Q10. But it is amazing how many of my patients fall short. in coenzyme Q10. And then furthermore, it's amazing how often physicians don't check that level. If you go into any physician with a medical complaint, I would argue that the very first thing you ought to do is make sure that that patient is getting 100% of the energy their cells need before you start jumping in and trying to do anything else, because we always want to make sure that the body is working as efficiently as possible. So that's where our energy's coming from. And you can imagine, well, like today, I found somebody who had a coenzyme Q10 level that was at 50% of where it should be. So that's telling me that brain cells are getting 50% of the energy they need to do 100% of what they want to do. Do you think that person's going to have any problems? Absolutely. Absolutely. So that's always an important part. And that's like the second piece here. So if you could imagine, a stool has three legs because that makes it stable. This brain nutrition kit has three components that enables it to be stable, because then we get to Super MemX2, and that is a more comprehensive approach at trying to provide the building blocks to the brain to be able to create the neurotransmitters that are needed. And that's that's important, because when the brain, if you're going to expect function, you want to give the brain all of the raw material it needs to get there. A simplistic view of Super MemX2 is just that. There are certainly things in Super MemX2 that also enhance mitochondrial function, so it helps the CoQ10 make the energy the cells need. So there's a lot of interdependency here, but it's all three that complete that base and make it very solid, so that we're able to really cover our bases when it comes to trying to help support someone with their cognitive function. Do you have what kind of feedback you've seen at the pharmacy? Because I know I've had some people on Super MemX2, so.
Well, we have that's what I was going to mention was, the thing to remember is this isn't just um, a more mature audience that, you're trying to speak to here. This is the people that are stressed. This is the people that are being bombarded in a world of daily chaos that can't pull out the simple memory things, that want to enhance that, at a much younger age, even than say 60 or 65, which is of course the bigger market for the people that come in for it, seeking it. But there's a much bigger area there to target.
Well, for example, when I have patients who require psychostimulants, I'll get adolescents who have a diagnosis of ADHD, and they wind up on a prescription ADHD medication. Um, for example, let's take Vyvanse. Well, Vyvanse works by forcing the brain cells to release serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine, epinephrine. Well, it's forcing the release, but it's not doing anything to help those cells create those neurotransmitters. So often, I have a patient who starts at a certain dose, and I think you've seen this as well. Once they start on a psychostimulant, how often do we see that dose creeping up? My personal belief is that what's happening is that psychostimulant is forcing the release of neurotransmitters beyond the cell's capability to keep up with it.
Mhm.
And so if you imagine the brain cells like a sponge, and the water in the sponge happens to be the neurotransmitters, the hand is the prescription drug. And you can squeeze it to a certain point, but you'll get to a certain point where you can't get anymore and you have to reposition your hand. And repositioning your hand is almost like raising the dose so you can get a better uh, angle on squeezing that even more. But what I'm trying to do when I provide these building blocks and this support for cognition, I'm trying to do things that will allow the brain to create more neurotransmitter. In other words, in my analogy, it would put more water in the sponge so that we're not having to reposition our hand, we're not having to raise that dose. And oftentimes I see that I can keep people stable and functioning on lower doses when, in the past, back in the day, before I was actually doing integrative medicine, I would have been just chasing their function and raising that dose. So we see that's the true, I guess, manifestation of integrative medicine. We're integrating traditional and natural medicine.
And especially in this case, it's the Vyvanse is working, it's doing its thing. But if you don't have any of the building blocks added in some way or another, like you said, you're either going to end up chasing the dose as high as it'll go or adding in more prescription medications.
Well, when we talk about prescriptions, and I think I've probably mentioned this in a call, pardon me, in a call once before, but you know, there's a lot of guesswork. I would love to tell you that psychiatry is as precise and soundly based as I like to come across, but unfortunately, that's not necessarily the case. There's a lot of guesswork. And, when we start talking about brain function, one of the things we see, for example, is the contrast between two ADHD medications, one being Strattera is the trade name, and the other being Capvey, which is a trade name. Now, the interesting thing is Strattera works by tricking the brain into thinking there's more norepinephrine, which is an excitatory neurotransmitter. Capvey works by blocking the release of norepinephrine, so they work exactly against each other. And, that's a head scratcher when you look at medicine and say, well, how can these medications do exactly the opposite and still be labeled for the same disease process or illness? So, I there's that's one of the nice things about looking at this kind of support, because this kind of support, what we're doing is we're trying to support the brain in its ability to function naturally. And that's a big missing piece, I think, in traditional medicine. But again, this is not treatment. It's just a matter of trying to support the brain to be as healthy as it can possibly be.
Nope, agreed. And it's one of the better products that's actually out there on the market also.
Well, I can't really say anything about that because then it would be self-serving since I'm not exactly an unbiased opinion.
There's a new one on the market every other day that, uses some odd aquatic animal product or something added in. So,
Yeah, that's true. That is true. It's interesting. I've seen products hit the market and I've seen them try. Now, some of them are way out there. One that you mentioned that has something to do with the color blue, uh, that really struggled to find any evidence. They're sort of on the right road, but they can't get there. They just don't have the formulation, nor do they have the quality of body wise.
mhm.
And, at this point, I would say don't try to reinvent the wheel. You've got such an excellent brain nutrition kit that works, so well together that I, like I said, that to no pun intended, it's a no-brainer to use it. But I thought at this point, I'm thinking we're probably going to want to find out if anybody has any questions. But Teresa, I wanted to see how you wanted, if you had anything you wanted to add here at the end.
Well, I'd like to add, that when we were talking about these three products, be it the lakes of a stool, to hold it up. Um, that some of the things that they're looking at, not just early onset dementia, but for people that have the genetic markers for Alzheimer's. They're looking at vitamin D levels, they're looking at inflammation levels. And so these are things that can be started at any time or for sign, or even before there's a sign. These aren't things that you have to wait for to wait and see if you're going to be one of those people. This is something that people can start at a very early age or at any point in the process and still get a benefit from it.
Can you tell us a little bit what led you to Body Wise, and why you particularly have an affinity for Body Wise vitamins?
I we have a lot of patients. I think everybody kind of comes to an integrative medicine by following the regular route and not getting answers. And so, in looking at the individual vitamins to find, again, just like for brain health or for immune system, I was looking at different brands, comparing pricing, quality of products. That was the biggest thing when it came to that is when you research these vitamins, you cannot always find any lab testing whatsoever to show what's actually in them. They don't have to show, so they don't. So that was the biggest reason that I ended up with Body Wise.
A lot of our products at BodyWise, we look at them as preventative. In other words, like changing the
Mhm.
oil in your car, you don't wait for it to blow up before you decide to do something like that. So I always looked at Super MemX as more of a, well, when your symptoms start arising, it would make sense to take it. But I'm definitely getting a different vibe on this call that, maybe we should. I mean, I just turned 77 the other day. I've always been the preventative kind of person. So I'm hearing here, and the reason I haven't mentioned to a lot of people that don't demonstrate any kind of symptoms about Super MemX was I was always under the impression that it was more of a wait for the symptoms and then take it. Am I, what is your, it sounds to me like you're telling me I better be taking this right now.
I think you should probably be taking it now. Not only does it have the building blocks as far as dementia, but it also has all of the things to help with memory and focus, which is not, as I said, not we'll go with mature person problem. That's a that in this day and age in particular, with your cell phone never stops bothering you. There's always a noise letting you know there's an email and a text message, and focus and memory alone are things that will benefit tremendously from this product.
When I formulated it, I didn't pull any punches on that formulation, and you know that. So, my practice and the way that I was using it coming out was always, being on the cautious side of using it when I started to see an indication for it. And I think I would still, probably be on the side of, easing into using it if we're using it, preventively, just because it is strong. And that's okay. I like the fact that it's 5 different capsules because that allows for people with different tolerances. Obviously, I'm not doing brain chemistry levels on all of these people that are taking Super Memex. So, if they take 5 capsules and they feel like that it was a little overactivating, that allows them to say take 3 or take a lesser amount and find that sweet spot for themselves that is going to help them function, but not put their excitatory activity into overdrive.
Hi there, everyone. Hi, Dr. Brad, Dr.
Hello,
Teresa. Good
sir.
to see you guys. What I wanted to kind of pick up on was the way Teresa and Brad were explaining things is integrative medicine is a combination of looking at nutritional cellular metabolism and science, and then trying to integrate that into what we call allopathic medicine, where allopathic medicine tries to get rid of the symptoms rather than trying to balance the system so that the system can operate in an optimal manner. And that's where the nutritional sciences and even some of the herbology stuff will really help with the adaptogenic activity of the products that we have and look at getting the cell as healthy as it can be so that we can eliminate some of the minor issues or get them ready to help another organ system like the adrenal gland or whatever to function at its best with support from nutritional intervention.
Well, everybody's being quiet, but I agree.
I hate to use functional medicine because I can't practice medicine as a pharmacist, but I can practice functional nutritional intervention.
I mean, seriously, this was really a very good conversation. You know, here, I say this to, first of all, a special thank you to Dr. Wajda and Dr. Butler for joining us this evening. And this was a really interesting conversation. I think in terms of, for speaking personally, but I do think when I say this personally, it relates to a lot of people that are customers of BodyWise. I mean, we're not kids. And we know that as we age, some of the key aspects of our hormones and other chemical products that our body makes, they just don't do it the way they used to. And so these supplements, I think, are really important. Now, as I mentioned earlier in the call, in my case, I find a lot of friends, they just have the beginnings of dementia, or in some cases, serious dementia already. And these are people that were very healthy, and it happened. I'd say, Dr. Wajda, in my experience, some of these people have gone from being as sharp and bright as you'd think anyone would be, CEOs of major companies like Quaker Oats, and 2 or 3 years later, like, you know, there's a wall there. There's just no recognition of so many issues. So bottom line, I think what you've done in creating this kit and these products and the way you talk about it, I know I'm really very focused, much more. And I always have been focused on diet and nutrition, but I'm just much more focused now because I realize in order for me to maintain what I'm calling optimum health for myself, you know, I got to be more knowledgeable and I really got to be using more supplements. And I do. So I'm very appreciative of your efforts tonight to help us understand brain chemistry and why we need these supplements and what they do for us. I know I've taken a renewed interest in CoQ10 with the way we've reformulated it. By the way, I've also taken a renewed interest in CardioWise and digestive products and so forth. So it's a combination because, again, I think we need these supplements. So thank you guys for this call. And it was very helpful. And I think it'll be helpful to all our customers, particularly as we replay it.